like God coveted Mary with Joseph, because Mary was somebody else's wife. I would loosely argue.
Wait, let's talk about this.
Well,
let's talk about this.
I'm happy to grant.
Tom came in blazing.
The CEO of meeting himself.
Tom came in blazing.
TJump is a beast when it comes to morality. I really like his version or his iterations of morality, his ideas on morality, and I think that they're pretty rock solid, so it's kind of hard to debate against that, especially when you bring theology into the discussion.
All right, good evening everyone, and thanks for coming. So I'm Todd Rice, and I'll be introducing our guests this evening in the debate. First off, I want to thank everyone for coming, thank our organizers, our donors, Don, Andy, other folks who helped out with the events of last night and tonight. A little bit about us, we're called the Skeptics of Middle Georgia. We're a small group in Middle Georgia. We get together every couple of weeks to have coffee, eat tacos, and discuss the news of the day. Philosophy, religion, politics, all things that we find interesting. We're made up of agnostics, skeptics, atheists, people who do identify as religious, everything in between. If you're interested in joining us, we're online, skepticsofmiddlegeorgia.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Meetup. Same name, Skeptics of Middle Georgia. We'll be pleased to meet you, so come say hi. I'd like to thank tonight also Oz and the crew from The Atheist Roundtable, T-A-R-T or TART, and their website is tart.live, L-I-V-E. So right now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our debaters tonight. Also, the topic as well. Sorry, I skipped over that. It's topic tonight, does the existence of evil disprove the Christian God? So a very interesting topic. So Mr. Tom Jump is known online as TJump. He's a self-appointed internet philosopher who debates online, mostly professors and philosophers on topics regarding science and religion. He also appears regularly on the YouTube channel Modern Day Debate. Mr. Samuel Nesan is from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He's the founder of Explain Apologetics, a ministry based in Malaysia. He is currently furthering his studies in the US, hoping to complete his PhD in apologetics. He spent 4 years as a badminton commentator on Malaysia TV, so FYI. So real simple debate tonight, 10-minute introduction. Each individual give 10 minutes of their thoughts, and then we'll get into the discussion. And we'll start with Tom Jump. So with further ado, we'll get started. Thank you.
So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for the live audience for watching. I'd like to thank Don, Adam, and Todd for hosting this. I really appreciate it. So the topic tonight is, does the evil disprove the existence of the Christian God? And I'm taking the affirmative. Yes, it does. And the reason for this is because if there is a God who's all powerful and all good, then if he did one evil thing that he could have not done or had the power to prevent, then he must not be perfectly good. And if he doesn't have the power to prevent that one thing, then he must not be all powerful. And since we're talking about the Christian God who is an all-good, all-powerful being, then one of those properties has to be wrong. So it can't exist if there is even a single example of an evil thing that it could have prevented, but didn't. And so all I have to do is give a single example of such kind. One is very easy, child cancer. And that would be one good example that could have been prevented and changed essentially nothing about the world. So if child cancer, if there could be a world exactly like ours without child cancer, one evil that was non-required, and God could have created this world, that disproves the Christian God. It proves that God does not exist. To go into a little further detail, not only can we give examples that God could have prevented, we could have given examples of God who literally did evil. Now, if the Christian God is all good, he can't literally do evil. So if there is a single action he did which was evil, that also disproves the Christian God, like drowning millions of babies in the global flood. That is clearly an evil. Like if there is an all-good God, that is one thing that all-good God could not do. there's this basis of perfect morality, it would not drown millions of babies in the global flood. That's a pretty good defeater for the Christian idea of a God. Another is the slavery, endorsing slavery, which happens dozens of times in the Bible, or telling different peoples to kill other peoples. Another evil that this Christian God apparently did that is permissible, that is the grounds of objective morality, is this God who can kill in order to be killed millions of people directly. That doesn't make any sense. That's literally a contradiction to say there is this all-powerful being who did these things, because if there was an all-powerful, all-good being, an all-good being would be one who didn't do these things. He would literally be good. He would not commit evil. So these evil acts that a God did must disprove that this being is all good, and therefore the definition of the Christian God as being all-powerful and all-good must necessarily be wrong, unless you're going to define a being who mass murders and orders the mass murder of millions of people to be perfectly good. This seems to be a contradiction to me. Obviously, the definition of perfectly good does not entail killing millions of people. I don't see this as a logical possibility. It's like if you say you have a square and you say it's round, that's a contradiction. It's two different properties that cannot exist at the same time in the same place on the same piece of thing. Doesn't work that way. So the question is well, are these things actually evil or wrong? Is it wrong to kill millions of babies? Can I prove it's wrong to kill millions of babies? Well, no, obviously. We don't have proof of objective morality. We can't discover it in a lab. We can't demonstrate it exists. We can't show that this fact is true moral fact and this fact is the untrue moral fact. All we can do is give inductive evidence. The evidence of morality is our feelings. We see if someone kills someone for fun, we have this feeling inside of us that that is wrong, that is evil. And that feeling is called our moral intuitions. And these moral intuitions are the basis of every single model of morality. Anyone has ever invented, when they say the word morality, they mean two things. One is these feelings that is an evil action, and two is that their theory of what explains why it's an evil action. Those are the two things that compose any model of morality. So if you include our feelings that drowning babies for fun is wrong as one of these moral intuitions that we have fundamentally and believe that is correct, that is in fact an immoral action, and the God did that action, if we happen to be right, if our intuitions are correct, that drowning babies for fun is an immoral action, then the Christian God who did drown babies cannot be moral. That's literally what it means. Now, obviously, maybe we're wrong. Maybe our intuitions are completely backwards. Maybe our feelings that drowning people for fun is immoral is just incorrect or incomplete. We don't have a full understanding. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think we're wrong about this assumption. I don't think we're wrong about the position that drowning babies is immoral. I think that's about as firm foundation we can get in morality. I don't think we can get a better example of an immoral action than to drown an innocent human being who has done nothing wrong, who can harm no one just for the sake of someone else's actions because other people did something. Does that justify it? Well, obviously not. So this seems to be, to me, a clear example, one of many examples in the Bible of an immoral action done by the Christian God, which I think we're correct in judging as immoral based on our moral intuitions, like it is immoral to drown babies for fun. And if we are correct, then that disproves the Christian God. And so my opponent tonight is probably going to argue something like there was some sufficient reason that would allow a God to, or justify a God in drowning millions of babies. I don't think that's possible. I don't think there is any sufficient reason that could justify drowning millions of babies. I think it's always going to be immoral, no matter what the cost is. It's always going to be the immoral thing. It's just going to be, it may be less immoral than another option, but it's always going to be immoral no matter what. It can never be the moral action to drown millions of babies. That can never be the moral action. That will never be a moral option, no matter what your excuse is. And if that's the case, then that proves there is no all-good God who could do this thing. And so my opponent is going to have to argue that actually there is. There's some justification that makes this action of drowning millions of babies moral. For example, free will. Say, well, we need a world with this kind of retribution or justice to allow for free will. And this free will thing is so fundamentally important to who we are and our allowance into heaven or whatever, some infinite reward of some kind, that without it, we're just all damned and we'd all go to hell and get infinite suffering or whatever. Therefore, it's moral to drown millions of babies because it gives us this free will thing and allows many of us the option to go to heaven. But I don't think that's correct. I think that's actually wrong. The fact that there is a positive consequence to an immoral action does not make the immoral action a moral action. Killing one person to save 5 people may be pragmatic, but it's not moral. You're still killing a person. You're still destroying their life without their consent. which means it's still an immoral action. It's just less immoral than the alternative. But the problem here is that the God is all powerful. So he could have just saved everyone. He didn't need to kill the 1 or the 5. He could have saved all 6 of them. So why didn't he? Well, the argument goes that in order to have free will, he had to choose. It's not possible. It's not logically possible to have all 6 beings be saved and for us to have free will. The problem is that, well, it is logically possible. It's very easily logically possible. We could just give everyone personal force fields. Now, if we all have free will, nothing about our human nature changes whatsoever. There are still Hitler and Stalin and Mao, all of the most evil people in the world you could possibly imagine, but everybody has personal force fields, then they couldn't harm anyone. If they tried to hurt a Jew, the Jew would just turn on the personal force field, completely safe. You still have Hitler, you still have evil, you still have all the free will desires of every evil person that's ever existed, but no Holocaust. So clearly, it's logically possible to have a world without the Holocaust, but still have free will. In fact, there's a very clear example of this. We can't fly. We can't just choose to freely jump, grow wings, and fly into the air whenever we want. We have that restriction, but that doesn't stop us from having free will under the Christian worldview. So obviously there are limitations to our free will. It doesn't mean we can do anything. It just means we can desire certain things, good or evil things. The same thing could apply to evil actions. If I could desire to harm someone, but couldn't physically do it just like I couldn't physically fly, that wouldn't restrict my free will, just like the inability to fly doesn't restrict my free will. Therefore, free will cannot be an excuse to justify these immoral actions, because it's clearly possible to have free will and to not have these immoral actions. And I want to go a step further than that. It's not logically possible for any such property to exist, because any such property can occur, we can have that positive aspect, whatever it is, without having the immoral actions. Any positive thing you could ever imagine, anything that's logically possible, you could have that and make it without the immoral action in the world, which means there cannot be a justification. And there's one easy way to justify this. Any possible property that could exist, that could justify whatever immoral thing you want to list, we can make it optional. You just say, would you as a person like to experience this negative consequence of suffering or of killing or drowning or whatever in order to have this benefit, or would you rather choose to opt out of this world? If every individual was given this option to adhere to this consequence, whatever it may be, suffering, drowning, whatever, for this benefit of free will or whatever property you want, and you just make that option optional, then it stops being immoral. So whatever thing it can be, like killing, drowning, tsunamis, hurricanes, sin permeating the world, any evil thing that is required for us to have this positive thing of free will or whatever property Samuel wants to introduce, can be had with a more moral world that we don't have right now, just by making it optional. That means it's logically impossible for there to be the Christian God, because there is this one thing that can be proven he could have done but didn't, which was make suffering optional. He said, if we chose to be in this world, then that's our choice. We can choose to suffer, we can choose to die, we can choose to destroy ourselves. That's fine. But if we were forced to be here against our consent, without our options, without giving us any choice in the matter whatsoever, that's an immoral action, and one God could have done differently by giving us free will, by giving us this thing, an extra option we didn't have. Give us the choice. Would we like to be a part of this world with this positive property that has this huge negative evil consequence, or would we like to opt out and go to a different world? That one decision was something that the Christian God could have offered us, but didn't if the Christian Bible is true, and we were all descendants of Adam and Eve, or some ambiguous interpretation of the New and Old Testament. Then we didn't choose to be here, we were forced here. We were forced to live in this world without our consent. God didn't ask us if we wanted to experience suffering. God didn't ask us if we want to experience cancer. God didn't ask us if we were consenting to the laws of physics, destroying our bodies over time. He just forced us into this and said, well, Adam and Eve ate the apple, they sinned, you're going to suffer from their proxy sin, and you're equally as guilty for some reason. He could have done one better, just give us the choice. If it was optional, where we could choose this perfect world of freeness that he thinks is so important, along with the suffering, or we could opt out, that would be a more moral world. And because there is a more moral option that God did not do, but had the power to do, then he cannot be all good, or he cannot be all powerful. And that disproves the existence of the Christian God. Because there's one thing that was more moral that he could have done, but didn't. And just to clarify, the reason we know he could have done this, It's because all these things I'm listing is possible for us to do in the future with technology. If we had the technological capability to manipulate the laws of physics, we could give everyone a personal force field. That is possible. There's no logical contradiction there. We have the technology, we can do it. So if God can't do it, and we can do it, God isn't all powerful. That produces a true contradiction. A round square, A is not A. God cannot be all good and all powerful. Because if he was all good, he would have given us the option, and if he was all powerful, he definitely could have done it. And I'd like to conclude there. That disproves the existence of the Christian God.
Right. Good evening, everyone. It's a great joy and pleasure to be in front of you today. Firstly, let me begin by thanking God for this opportunity to share with all of you my perspective as a Christian. And I want to begin by thanking every one of you for coming out here in the midst of COVID to hear someone talk about why God is good. In spite of the fact that I guess most of you don't believe in God, so thank you for that. And I also want to thank Don especially for being so hospitable. Yeah, Don, thanks for being so hospitable. Thanks to Andy for being so hospitable and giving us that wonderful trip and a conversation from the airport to here. I want to thank James Kunz for sponsoring the flight for us to be able to come down and do it. And to Tom for the kind invitation. I've debated Tom, this I think the 5th time I'm debating Tom. And I think that I have an advantage this time because unlike all the other times in debating Tom had his magical chair with him. And because he doesn't have his magical chair, I know this is going to be an advantage for me. So, well, the topic, why, this tension between God's goodness and God's power is one that has caused a lot of people to lose their faith. So can I begin by asking by show of hands, how many of you personally have struggled with this? Either when you were a believer or even now, this is a personal struggle that you've gone through. Can I see your hands? Now, for those of you who are not at home, thank you. Hands went up everywhere here. So this is something that I struggle with. This is something that believers struggle with. This is something that non-believers, people who don't believe in God, struggle with. So unlike the other arguments, which are more evidential in nature, empirical, the question of evolution versus intelligent design, the question of the origins of the universe, this one touches at the nerve of the human emotion. Why is there so much evil if God is all good? So let me start off by saying in a disclaimer here, in responding to this, recognizing that everyone has struggled with this, I'll be defending the proposition that evil does not disprove the Christian God. And in doing so, here's a list of 5 things I will not be doing. Number 1, I will not be appealing to free will. Large part of Tom's presentation dealt with the free will defense. I reject free will, so I think that's something that Tom and I have in common. Number 2, I'm not going to be spending all my time focusing on objective moral values and duties, even though I've seen so many debates getting of this nature, getting sidetracked because of that. Tom and I are actually co-authoring a book on this, and I hope to discuss that in that book. Number 3, I will not be pretending to know why there is so much evil in the world. I think skeptics have something good to teach believers, and that is sometimes if you don't know, it's better to say you don't know. So I'm not going to pretend to know why. I'm agnostic as to why there is so much evil in the world. Number 4, I'm not going to be making light of evil in the world. There are things that happen that are really bad. I'm not going to downplay them. I'm not going to make them sound like, well, it's okay, it's justifiable. Evil is evil. People go through bad things, and it's not something we should downplay. And 5th, and finally, most importantly, I will not be taking God off the hook. I will not be making excuses for God as to why there is so much evil in the world. I want, if you could, let's think about the worst evil action you can think of. As a believer in God, I believe that God had the power to stop that evil action. He absolutely did. I believe that God knew how to do it, He had the power to do it, but God chose not to do it. So I'm not going to come here and make excuses as to why God did not do it, or why God is not responsible for evil in the world. I hold that God is ultimately responsible for every single evil action that happens. Although my defense today will show why God is not culpable for the evil that takes place, even though he's responsible for every one of it. Think the Holocaust, think the murders that go around, think of, any evil action that you want to think about. So the ultimate challenge facing a believer in God, the Christian, is the problem of evil challenges the internal coherence of the Christian worldview. Namely, its two pillars. On the one hand, you have the pillar of God's goodness, and on the other hand, you have the claim that God is all-powerful. Jesus makes it clear in Mark chapter 10, verse 18, when he says that no one is good except God alone. In Genesis 18:14, God declares rhetorically, saying, is anything too hard for the Lord? Clearly, God thinks that he can stop any evil that he wants to. Nothing is too hard for God. And Job therefore rightly points out in Job 42 verse 2, I know you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. So if God can do all things and God is all powerful and God is all good, I think the skeptic and the believer should be on the same page in asking, then why on earth is there so much evil in this world today? Now I think Tom kind of implied the direction I'll be taking today, and that is to say that God has sufficient reasons for permitting evil in the world. But the big question is to then ask, why does God do that? Now, as I said earlier, I don't presume to know why, but is it possible to even postulate the possibility that God could have sufficient reasons for permitting evil in the world? Well, the Bible seems to indicate that Joseph, someone who was sold into slavery in Egypt, after being rising through the ranks and becoming a governor of Egypt, he's confronted by his brothers, and his brothers are rather apologetic. They say to him, don't kill us for what we did to you. Joseph replies in Genesis 50:20, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So I believe that the Bible teaches that since we're defending the Christian worldview, God uses evil to bring about certain good things. But I think the main problem, I think Tom was right in pointing this out, is that how would one define good? If the definition of good is as what Tom pointed out earlier, that basically God should not impose himself on human beings, God should not impose himself on our will, he should give us total freedom, then of course I would have to agree then by that definition, Tom's definition, God is evil. But that's not the definition of the Christian worldview. Remember what I said at the start. The challenge of the problem of evil is a challenge to the internal coherence of the Christian worldview. So in order to respond, you've got to go and understand what the Christian worldview defines to be good. So what does the Bible define as ultimately good? Romans 12:2 says that the will of God is what is ultimately good, acceptable, and perfect. Now, this is not an answer as an atheist, as a skeptic. I don't expect someone to go, yeah, that makes sense. No, I mean, naturally, we revolt against things that don't go our way. When a police catches a person who is a criminal, naturally the criminal doesn't think it's good for him. It's a matter of perspective. I think that by claiming that God is good, what we essentially, the Christian, is saying is that God is holy. His plans are what is good. So in other words, the actions that Tom pointed out are absolutely evil. Harming children, absolutely evil. The reason it's evil is because it goes against God's nature. But then does that make sense to say that God can somehow violate his own nature? No. But in a sense, what I'll argue here today is that God does not murder anyone. See, in the Christian worldview, this life is not there is. It's not the only life there is. So when we understand things from a naturalistic point of view, you think that, well, murder is the end of life. God has just committed murder. To God, it's not murder at all. This is the physical world. He has the ability, we believe in the existence of soul. God can actually move a person spatially from the realm of the living to the realm of the soul. It's not murder at all. In fact, Jesus goes on to tell the people in his lifetime, God is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. To him, Abraham is still alive. To him, all the patriarchs are still alive. But to our perspective, it's murder. In our perspective, to murder a child is evil, but not on God's side. To God, they're very much alive. So in closing then, I hope that this is just an introduction to help us realize where I'm coming from. I will contend tonight that God has morally sufficient reasons for permitting evil in the world. And the one thing I would say before I close is this. The greatest evil that I can ever imagine as a believer in God is the death of God's own Son. The fact that as a Christian, I believe that God came down as man, was spit upon, was slapped, was scourged, and ultimately hung naked on a cross. To me, that's the greatest evil I can ever think of. But if you ask me what's the greatest good that has ever happened in the world, as a Christian, I will say it was the spitting, the slapping, the whipping, and the ultimate crucifixion of Jesus Christ that brings about eternal life to everyone who places their faith in him. So I believe as a Christian, God can take the worst evil and turn it into the greatest good. That's the argument I'm making, that God has a greater good for bringing out evil. Sure, if you define it from the human perspective and say evil is ultimately what serves my benefit, then sure, God is evil. But if evil is defined as something that, if good is defined as what God's will is, then I think God's will, and in his goodness and mercy, shows us through the cross of Jesus Christ how he can take evil and turn it into good. That, I believe, gives the believer hope to realize that God has morally good reasons for permitting evil in the world. Thank you.
So to start our open dialogue section, you said that because the babies are alive in heaven, he hasn't murdered them, correct?
I didn't say they're alive in heaven. I don't know where they are.
Okay, yeah, just general thing.
Yeah.
So the babies are still alive, he hasn't killed them.
You first of all have to, I think that when you talk about goodness, you have to bring about the issue of authority comes in. See, with authority comes what you can do authoritatively and what you can't do. So for example, running a red light. Let's, for the sake of argument, let's just say it's immoral, right? To run a red light. But the cops have the authority to do so. That doesn't make it immoral. Now, sure, they can abuse that, and that's a whole different topic there. But the point is, do you have the authority to do so is what I'm challenging. Now, as far as God's actions of drowning babies and basically every instance that you brought up was actually an act of judgment of God against a people that sinned against him. And the question that I would ask you is that does God have the right to judge people?
Right, so I'd say it has nothing to do with authority. So let's take your police example. Why do police have the right to run the red light? Is it because they're just super high up in the food chain so they can just do it? Or is it because they need to run the red light in order to save other people's lives? They're doing it pragmatically. They're saying, we have a reason to do this. And this reason will cause less suffering to other people. So if running the red light or hurting someone to save other people, putting one person in prison to save other people that he's going to harm. Like the cops have the authority to do that. Now I'd say it's still immoral. It's still immoral to put someone in prison without their consent because there's a more moral option there, which is if we had personal force fields for everyone, we could just, like if we were all powerful beings, we could just give everyone a personal force field. So if there's a criminal who wants to harm someone, well, we don't need to put them in prison, we just give everyone a personal force field and there's nothing we can do anymore. Right. And that option seems more moral than putting that person in prison. Like if we had these two possibilities, give everyone a personal force field or put the person in prison against their consent, it seems like the personal force field is a more moral option, or would you disagree?
Yes, I would disagree. What I was essentially say is this, that just to clarify, and then I'll answer your objection. Basically, a person's will should not be imposed upon, is what you're saying is the ultimate good.
Well, I haven't made an assertion.
And I was going to respond to that, but just,
I haven't made an assertion about the ultimate good yet, because right now I'm making an inductive argument for what goodness is.
But hypothetically, is if you're saying that having someone, you said it's immoral, for example, to have someone's will imposed upon. So if you're assuming that that's immoral, right, and that morality would mean that a person has the will to do. I mean, their will is not. No one is imposing on their will.
Well, that's a more complicated argument about what morality is. Right now, I'm just using common examples. Like, is it more immoral to put someone in prison, or is it more immoral to give people force fields? Now, why isn't that? I haven't asked you why yet.
Sure.
It's just an intuitive question I'm asking.
Sure.
To me, it seems more immoral to put the person in prison because there's a more moral option. Now, of course, the reason why is because I think it's any involuntary ritual is wrong.
Right, but you see, Tom, when you say something is more immoral, you have a reference point on the basis of which you are saying what is it in contrast to what is it more. So you have intuitions.
Yeah, so I'm saying that if I see someone drowning a baby, I feel that's immoral. So in every model of morality, there's necessarily the first thing they're referring to is their intuitions. They have a feeling that that's immoral.
But that's not my question. So I mean, if you're saying that's the reference point, I want to know what's the good, not comparatively why this is immoral, but what's the good then? So then we can discuss on the basis of the good what is more immoral and what is less
Well, we
immoral.
don't need to know that. All we need to know is one thing. So is the good, whatever it is it like if we can know for a fact that it is immoral to drown babies, and that fact describes the good, whatever it is.
You see, if you don't know what is good, and I hope everyone here is following this. If you don't know what is good, how can you then say what is more immoral? Because what is more immoral has to be basically further from what you define to be as the good. So if you tell me what the good is, and I can answer that question of whether this would be more immoral or less immoral. So what is the good?
Well, again, I don't need to answer that. And you don't absolutely need to know. Wait, just let me answer.
Yeah.
So if I need to know what gold is, and I need to know what silver is, I don't need a microscope to look at the protons and neutrons in gold. I don't need to know what the fundamental nature of gold is. I can know this has these properties, it's gold. This does not have these properties, it's not gold. I don't need to know why. I need to know nothing about the fundamental nature of gold.
Yeah.
But the same thing applies to evil.
Right.
All I have to do is give one particular example. Drowning babies is immoral. That's my goal. I don't know why. I don't need to give a perfect definition of the good. I just need to know that example is immoral and saving babies is not immoral. And if I'm right about this and something drowns babies, then it's the immoral one.
Right.
So I don't need to know fundamentally what good is.
Right.
I just need to have a single example. And if I'm right about that example, that disproves anything that does that evil thing.
Right, you see, but again, I'm getting back to my point earlier that if you can't define what is the good, and I'm saying, you see, when you talk about, to use your analogy, you talked about what is gold. I'm asking you what's the properties of gold, to which you can say which is a faker gold, if you like, which is a gold that is less gold, a more artificial gold. See, I can only know which is less gold, to use that phrase, if you first of all tell me what is the gold, what's the properties of gold. So I want to answer your question whether it's more immoral or less immoral. I don't want to forget that question. It was an important one. Is it more immoral or less immoral for babies drowning? But I need to know what's the good first. So on my part, I can easily tell you from my worldview that again, and I really didn't want to get. I said in my opening statement, I didn't want this to be a debate about what is the basis of objective morality, because that's going to sidetrack. But if you're asking me the question, whether this is more immoral or not, I would have to know what is the good in your definition, because I suspect, please correct me if I'm misrepresenting you, what you deem to be good is basically, you hypothesize of a world where no one imposes on, everyone gets their will, and this optional thing that you spoke about, that if I don't like this world, I can basically have my own little universe and do that. That's what you actually vision to be the good, right?
Well, you're right that what objective morality is a different topic. So
yes.
What everyone means by morality, what morality actually is a phenomenon. Like
yes.
if we're standing in the middle of a desert and we see, there's an ocean somewhere in the distance. Maybe it's a mirage,
right.
Maybe it's real, we don't know.
Right.
When we say the word ocean, we mean that thing that we're seeing.
Right.
So we have a sense experience, and whatever that word that we use to describe that sense experience is that sense experience.
Right.
So when we talk about morality, we're talking about the sense experience.
Right.
Morality literally is our feeling it's wrong to drown babies. Now, we can use that as a basis to try and construct the objective morality. We can use that as a building block. Like if we see the ocean, it looks blue, then we can predict, well, maybe if we get closer to it, we'll fill water with it and know what the ocean is.
Right.
But that doesn't matter. All that matters is when we talk about the ocean, we're talking about that sense experience.
Right.
So when we're talking about morality, we're talking about that feeling inside of us that it's wrong to do X.
Right.
And we may or may not be right about that. There may be an ocean there, it may be a mirage.
Right.
So the question is, if we're right, that drowning babies is wrong,
right,
and the God drowned babies, that would disprove God. Hypothetically, just that's a valid argument, correct?
No, not if basically that. Okay, so I want to. Yeah.
Valid, not sound. Valid, just premise, conclusion false from the premises.
No, I mean valid if you define good in a certain way. So I was basically denying your definition of good.
Well, I just want to. So valid, I mean like catch dogs or chickens.
Yeah, sure.
So the argument is that if drowning babies is wrong,
yes,
God drowned babies.
Oh yes.
God
it's totally valid. It's totally valid.
So if we accept that the first premise is true,
yes,
that drowning babies is objectively immoral, then the conclusion is both valid and sound. But we can't
Yes.
prove it. We can't prove that the first premise is sound.
Right.
But if anyone in the audience agrees, drowning babies is true, that is a sound premise,
Right.
then they would see, yeah, Christian God's impossible.
Fully agree with you.
And so your objection is that no, that first premise is not sound. That is your objection.
Yeah, I'm basically pushing back against your definition of good, and I think essentially, again, I didn't want it to go down to a debate as to what good is, because we are having a book debate on that. And plus, I want people to buy the book. Don't you think that would be evil if they?
Yeah, that'd be evil. Evil thing.
Essentially, since your question is telling me what is more immoral than that, I felt I could not give you an accurate answer unless I first of all know what the good is. And number
Sorry, I just want to clarify. This is just my definition of the word. So if you're granting my definition of the first premise, that drowning babies is objectively immoral, objective by definition would apply to all possible beings. So it seems like you're saying that my definition of objective in that sentence is false. You're saying that no, that first premise is false because God has the authority, therefore it's not objectively immoral.
So if I could rephrase your first premise, I would say drowning babies is objectively immoral for someone who doesn't have the authority to do so. And I think that applies to every moral action. That's why I went to the illustration of running the light. Now, I wanted to get...
I want to pick up on that really quickly. So again, so that's technically a straw man. You've rephrased my argument into your version. But
No,
my
I'm
argument-
just telling you I disagree with your
Yep.
version. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to get to. So
Yeah.
my version, which says drowning babies is objectively immoral, as my interpretation of my definitions of those words, you're saying that is wrong. That first premise is false. It is unsound. It is not the case that it is drowning babies is objectively immoral. Because again, I define objectively immoral meaning to apply to everyone, any conscious agent ever at all. So you're saying that first premise, drowning babies is objectively immoral, as I say it, as I see the meaning of the words, is false.
So let me clarify what I mean, so that, because I think that we need to qualify so that we just have a clearer understanding of what we're saying. It would be equivalent to saying that hanging a human being is wrong, right? Hanging a human being is wrong.
Sure.
But
I'd
the
say
government hangs human beings. And in my country, if you commit murder, capital punishment is by hanging. Now, you may disagree with capital punishment, it's a different topic. But if that's true, then basically the government would have to be evil to commit that. So, thank you. All right. So the government would have to be evil to basically do that. And I would say, no, the government has the authority to do that. That's what I'm applying to this principle. I'm saying whether it's an issue of authority. And so I was modifying it, not trying to say, I would disagree with your first point. I didn't say yours is false or invalid. I said that based on my view, that it's an issue of whether someone has the authority to do so or not. Hanging a human being is wrong. Putting someone behind bars is wrong. You don't have the authority to put anyone behind bars, but the government has the authority to do so. And in that instance, it's not wrong. I'm applying it to the concept of justice, which I think is a fundamental attribute of God. So I want to let you follow up your point on that.
Yeah, so you're saying that my premise, it is objectively immoral to drown babies, is false, but it would be true if it's objectively immoral to drown babies if you don't have the authority. That one would be true. But the way I phrase it, in my definitions of the word, it is objectively immoral to drown babies. That is false. The way I phrased it, the way I mean the words when I say the sentence, that is false. You're objecting to my first premise, because my first premises are, it's objectively immoral to drown babies. In all instances, no matter what, there is no caveat at all, ever, under any circumstances.
So all I'm saying is there needs to be a caveat.
Yes, so you're saying my premise is wrong, there needs to be a caveat.
Yes.
There. It is not always objectively immoral to drown babies.
Yes.
There are cases where
Yes.
it's moral to drown babies.
Yes.
Okay. That seems intuitively incorrect to me. So like if I said, yeah, like, I am a human being, like that seems intuitively correct to me. You're saying, no, you're in the matrix, you're a bunch of ones and zeros. I'm like, I don't think so. I think that is incorrect.
I think, Tom, that the way that you're phrasing it, it would not apply to any, and I know your view. You consider a parent, for example, punishing a child to be immoral as well. Right?
Well, that's again a different topic.
Yeah, it's a different topic, but I'm saying, knowing from where you come from, you consider that immoral as well. It's a different topic.
Well,
True.
In my model, I consider rocks falling on people immoral as a consequence. So my model is irrelevant here. All that matters is if you agree, it's objectively immoral to drown babies.
And I clearly told you that I denied that.
Okay, great. So I'm talking about from the audience's perspective. If anyone in the audience agrees it is always immoral to drown babies, then that disproves God.
But
so
who makes the sorry?
Well, again, so this is an inductive argument. So we don't know what objective morality is. We're just saying we see this phenomenon like there's an ocean in the distance, and the way we describe it, it seems blue. It seems like we see it blue.
Tom, I mean, appealing to the audience as the arbitrators of what is right and wrong That's the exact opposite of what objective is.
I'm appealing to moral intuition. So
Yeah, but intuition is not objective. Intuitions differ from time to time, circumstances and all that. What
Sure,
makes
sure, it can be.
and you yourself said there's no empirical basis for this, right? In one of your other debates on this
Yes,
topic.
it's an unsolved
So it's not objective by that. I mean, I think you're misusing the word objective, don't you think?
well, no, because fallibilism, knowledge, you can have knowledge without certainty. So my basis here is that drowning babies is objectively immoral. That seems to be as strong a basis you can get, just like my basis of we have testable predictions the world is round. It seems equally as supported there. Those are super strong premises.
Right.
If there is objective morality. If you don't think morality is objective, then obviously you
No,
can
obviously
grant-
I do, right?
So
We
yeah,
both do.
we
so,
both.
yeah.
So if you grant there is objective morality, and so you grant there are true statements about morality,
Right.
this one is about as true as you can get. You can't. It's like the world is round. It's been proven the world is round. This drowning babies is objectively immoral. Is about as close as you can get to that in the moral compass.
Yes.
If you agree with that statement, if you think our moral intuition is like we see the ocean is blue when we look at it, we could be wrong. It could be a delusion. But if you think you're right, the ocean is blue. That if you are right, then that disproves God. So the question is of course we could be wrong. And so you're saying we're wrong. It's not, the ocean isn't blue. It's not the case that drowning babies is always immoral. You're saying there are exceptions. There are exceptions that it is sometimes moral to drown babies.
I'm saying there are exceptions, just as I think, and I think that the model that I'm advocating would apply for every standard of human being. For example, it's wrong for a person to be put behind bars. That's objectively wrong for that to happen. But in the event that, for example, the government has the authority to execute justice, and in that case, it is not the government is not wrong for doing so. It's merely the theory of retribution we're talking about here. So I'm saying that there are caveats that need to be put there. I'm saying that the model that I'm proposing here applies across the board to all those instances, whereas it's not as straightforward as I think it is. I think it's not as black and white as we are. There are caveats there. There are certain things, and I think that the key to basically understanding objective morality is to understand authority, because behind the moral principles comes an authority. Otherwise, why should we think that that's authoritative?
Well,
Like,
I mean,
why is that
saying-
prescriptive? So basically, otherwise it becomes a matter of, yeah, that's objective. So what?
Well,
It's
I mean,
not an ought.
If you say, well, why we have to consider authority, because if we don't consider authority, why is it authoritative? It's
Yes.
kind of circular there. But so I mean,
No, but you get what I mean.
Yes, yes. So
Yes.
the point I've just been trying to hash over was just to
Yeah.
clarify your position and my position. So my position, it's always immoral. You're saying there's a caveat.
There's a caveat.
So
yeah.
my first premise is not, it's always immoral is wrong. There are caveats, and so this is because your caveat is authority. So
So can I just test you on that, just the consistency of what you're saying? Because if that's true, and then you can follow up on that one. So would you consider then, just to show the consistency of that, would you consider the government putting someone in jail to be an evil thing?
well, we haven't gotten there yet. So this is the only claim I've made is that it's
So
always.
all I'm saying is, until we get to that, there's an inconsistency.
No.
here.
The only claim I've made is that it's
Yeah.
always wrong to drown babies. So if you want to show an inconsistency, you have to show an example where it's not always wrong to drown babies.
I just did. I said, for example, that God has the authority to do that.
Well, so let's hypothetically use some other example there, because obviously we disagree with that. So,
Yeah.
So using your authoritative example, can you give another example, like the police station, the police?
I just did.
the red light?
I just did. For example, the government has the authority. Same principle. Locking someone against their will is always wrong. The government has the authority to enact justice and do that. So
Why?
that's because the government has been like asking me why, or
Oh, it's,
is it because you disagree to that? Or?
Yes, I absolutely.
So you believe the government doesn't have the authority to put people behind
No,
bars?
I think they're pragmatically. So it's like my example of killing one to save five. It's always wrong to kill the one. There is never a single case where it is a moral thing to do to kill the one. Now it's a justified immoral action, so it's the least evil you can do, because we have these limitations. Like obviously, if there's a trolley coming down and it's going to hit one person or five people, since you are a physical being, you have limited strength, you can't stop the trolley, you got to pick one of the five, then you're justified in picking the one. It's still immoral, you're still killing one. But if you were really strong, if you were Hercules strong, you could just stop the trolley.
Right.
If you chose to kill the one, you're immoral. You've done something deliberately immoral. There is no justification for that. That is horrible.
Right.
Because you have the option to do a different action that has less of something.
Right.
So in the case of the prison, the exact same thing applies. We have an option to put someone in prison, which is like killing the one,
Right.
or we have an option of letting them go around killing people, which is killing the five. And
Right.
if you choose to save or put the one in prison, that is a lesser immoral action, but it's still immoral. And the way we know it's still immoral is because there's a more moral option, which is
Again,
give everyone personal force points.
Right. So again, two issues I want to deal with. Now you brought that. Could you repeat that last line again? The more moral option would be to give everyone.
Personal force fields.
Explain that a bit.
Oh yeah. In the model of the killing the 1 and the 5, like you have an option of killing 1, you have an option of killing 5. Clearly, something immoral is going to happen because someone's going to die.
Yes.
So if we remove the death, it's less immoral. So if we insert an option other than kill 1 or kill 5 that saves 6, that's a more moral option. The same thing applies to putting someone in prison. If the options are put someone in prison, which I consider to be immoral because you're imposing on their will by my definition, or you're letting that person impose on other people's wills by killing them. There's one immoral action, or 2 different options of immoral actions.
Right.
But if you can get rid of both of those and say there's save everyone,
right,
that's the more moral option.
See, this is where I think that again, this is where I consider this to be the flaw in your model. And again, this is just my opinion. I could be wrong. So I think the flaw in the model is this: that essentially what you want to do is basically saying, and this is what I was trying to get at earlier, because I'm aware of your view. So. If you believe, if you believe that basically everyone ought to have their own, I don't know the exact way you phrase it, but their own freedom, to do whatever they want. Nothing should be imposed on their will. Otherwise, you consider that slavery, and stuff like that. I'll just explain this. So, if that's the case, I think what you essentially want to do is to make everyone God. And if everyone is God, which is basically the ability not to have their will imposed upon. Then that, I think, would be an internal coherence argument against the existence of God. So I think it's the exact opposite. If you get what I mean.
Well, that doesn't make any sense to me.
So let me clarify that. So if, for example, if God, being God, does not have the authority to impose His will on anyone, to me that's not God. Because God, by definition, has the authority to do that which He wants.
You just contradicted yourself. So you said, in my model, I want everyone to be God.
Yes.
But God can't be someone who doesn't have the power or the authority to impose on others, correct?
Yes.
But in my model, no one has the authority to impose on anyone else. So I'm not saying they're going to be.
No, but when you bring up the problem of evil, aren't you basically challenging the internal coherence of the Christian worldview? Because the title of today's debate is whether the problem of evil disproves the Christian God. So,
well, those are two different topics. My personal definition of morality is irrelevant here. So I've listed like 3 premises that are inherent to my argument for this debate, which are: 1, drowning babies is always immoral.
Right.
Killing 1 is immoral, but less immoral than killing 5, and there's a more moral option. So those are the only claims I've made. I haven't made any further claims about my model.
So let me see if I can, and I'm trying to paraphrase it to show why I think I disagree with it.
Okay.
And so what you're essentially saying is, this is what I, TJump, define as morality. Let's take the argument that drowning babies is always wrong. This is what I, TJump, define it.
Yep.
Since God doesn't meet that standard, therefore the Christian God doesn't exist. He's not all good and all powerful. I think that doesn't deal with the title of today's debate, which is to challenge the internal coherence. So you can't come and say that this is what I define to be good. You've got to look into what the biblical definition of good is if you're going to challenge the internal coherence of the biblical worldview. Otherwise, all I think we can conclude is that the biblical model of God doesn't correspondence theory of truth, to TJump's moral standards or the model of morality, but it's internally coherent. But as long as it's internally coherent, I think the debate is over, TJump.
Well, things can be internally coherent and still be proven to not exist.
Yes, but the title of today's debate is whether it's internally coherent. Is God all good? And I mean, does basically evil in the world disprove the all good and all powerful God? I mean, Christianity, the way it's defined. And I think that's internally coherent. As long as it is, it doesn't disprove the Christian God at all. Because the Christian God himself, while admitting to be, while claiming to be good, and again, I'm not here to prove the existence of God. That's not today's debate at all. I'm saying that if the Christian God defines himself to be good, in that good is defined as what his nature is, and if the Christian God is claiming to be all powerful, and in that he basically acts in consistency with his nature and judges the world, which is Genesis 6, the flood, every instant that you brought up. To me, that's still an internally coherent worldview. And when you say that's not necessarily true, that's true. But that's the title of today's debate. That's what we're debating.
A universe where you don't exist, is that internally consistent?
Not to the person saying that, obviously.
Well, yeah. So, but I can say a universe where Samuel Nesan does not exist. That's perfectly internally consistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But because you have personal experience, like obviously
it doesn't correspond to reality. I guess we agree.
Right. So things can be internally consistent and objectively false.
Yes.
So the fact that the God worldview may be internally consistent in that it defines drowning babies as sometimes moral doesn't matter. All the question is, does it correspond to reality? Is the question I'm answering.
So again, I guess this is where we are approaching it from different angles. I'm approaching it from saying the Christian God is defined to be good in X way. And again, everyone here knows that I've taken all my definitions directly from the pages of Scripture, just so that because we're debating the Christian God, and that's the authoritative primary source to go to. The Scripture says this is what God's goodness is. The Scripture defines what good is. The Scripture defines what God's power is, and all that. And when you put that together, the internal coherence challenge falls flat. And to me, I think that is what we're debating here. Now, if you want to say that, well, it doesn't correspond to what I define to be morally good, I'm happy to concede that, TJump.
Well, that's not quite the argument I'm making. So if I have a worldview that says Samuel Nesan doesn't exist. You are a brain in a vat or a computer simulation, a non-real person, a zombie, P-zombie. Now, obviously, you can say, okay, yeah, that's internally consistent. There's no logical contradictions in that definition of the worldview you've provided. But there's this fact in reality that completely proves that wrong. So we know because you have this direct experience of yourself existing.
Yes.
But that worldview, even though it's perfectly internally consistent, all the definitions within the worldview align with one another, it's clearly proven wrong.
Right.
So I'm saying that's the exact same thing that I experience. So you have this internally consistent worldview where
So would you grant that?
What?
Would you grant it's internally consistent?
Yes, happy.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
any worldview that doesn't say I have a square circle is internally consistent. So if you define good as, if you don't grant the premise that drowning babies is always wrong, then sure.
And I don't.
It's not always wrong to drown babies in your worldview, and that's perfectly consistent. But I'm saying that I have this direct experience, just like you do of you existing.
Perfect.
That drowning babies is always wrong.
Perfect, yeah.
So if you have this worldview that's internally consistent that says that fact is wrong, and I have this direct experience of that fact, then I can say I've defeated your worldview, just like you can say mine.
According to your experience, you've defeated my worldview. That's what essentially you're saying.
That's how science works. So we have an experience the world is round, the world is flat.
Wait a minute, TJump. Weren't you the one that said there's no empirical basis to what you just said?
Testable prediction. So we still empirically.
I mean, so it is not empirical.
Well,
which is it? Is it empirical or is it not?
We have empirical and sense experience. We have sense experience. So a feeling that this is immoral. We don't have any empirical confirmation.
That's existential, not empirical.
Empirical.
That's existential, not empirical.
Empirical is sense experience. So I count sense experience as direct experience. You have a feeling that's a sense
But
experience.
isn't it existential?
I'm not sure what you mean there.
Existential is what corresponds to your experience. Empirical is what corresponds to your five senses, your sense of smell, taste, touch, and so forth.
Well, again, I'm happy to grant that if you want to use those terminologies. That's fine. You can call it
So it's not empirical, it's existential.
I'm going to call it empirical. That's my terminology. It's perfectly fine. It's empirical. It's a sense experience. I feel that it's immoral. So it's empirical. Now, we don't have any empirical confirmation. We don't have testable prediction.
Sure.
Just like we can testably predict the world is round. We don't have that. But I still have the direct experience. I can't testably predict that I have conscious experience, right? You can't demonstrate with scientific certainty that you have conscious experience.
Right.
But you have a direct experience of it, so that's all that matters.
Right.
So you have defeated my worldview that Samuel Nesan doesn't exist. In my perfectly internally consistent worldview where all the definitions line up, that Samuel Nesan doesn't exist, you have proven that wrong. You don't have scientific evidence.
Right.
You obviously can't prove your conscience.
Right.
But you yourself, because you have this direct experience, have proven for a fact that worldview is wrong. Now, I'm saying I've done the same thing with yours.
Yes.
You have this.
And I'm happy to concede that.
Okay. I win.
No, I mean, you've conceded the internal coherence, and I think that's what I made it very clear in my opening statement. I'm here to demonstrate there is no internal, the internal coherence of the Christian worldview is intact. A good and all-powerful God, as defined by the Scriptures, the problem of evil doesn't challenge that at all, if anything. But at the same time, I demonstrated, for example, how God is able to use evil in the world to bring about good. And again, good in which God, the way in which He chooses to glorify Himself. So again, you've conceded that the internal coherence is not at stake here. That you've granted that, and I'm willing to concede that the way that I define, the way that a theist would define objective morality is not corresponding to what you would
Sure.
in your sensory experience.
Sure, but
you call it.
I never argued the worldview is inconsistent, or I never said that. That was never in my opening. That was never a part of my argument. So that wasn't. I never.
Right. So I guess that I guess in that sense that if all you want to say is that, well, according to my existential feeling, or what you call my empirical feeling, that this is wrong. It's always wrong to drown babies. If you come up with that. And I'll argue that's a bit arbitrary. Not a bit. It is arbitrary in my view. Again, we can talk about that. And if you say that, well, since God doesn't do that, he's wrong, I'm happy to concede that, because TJump says it's this. You came up with, there's this story, about this guy who basically, King was looking for guys who shoots arrows, archers. Why did that word slip my mind? He was looking for great archers, and then he comes across a field and then finds a group of trees with archery targets dead center in all those trees. And the target is then, every one of them, the arrow is dead center. So the king sets out and says, find me the person that shot this. I want this guy to be the guy that leads my archers in the next war. And they bring him a little boy. And the boy basically says that, the king asks, did you shoot all of this? And the boy says, yeah, I shot every one of them. So how? And he says, it's easy. I shoot first and then I draw the circles. And so I think that's kind of what I feel that you're doing. You said, this is what my sensory experience is, and then you're drawing the circle of objective morality around that. And I mean, if that's what you define to be objectively good, then yeah, sure. But that's not what it's not internally inconsistent with the way the scripture defines it. And I think that was all I was trying to prove.
Well, how would that apply to my counterexample? So I have a worldview where Samuel Nesan doesn't exist. Does you having the experience, is that you shooting the arrow and drawing the circle?
But the title of today's debate is not that Samuel Nesan exists. No, hypothetically, I'm just saying that.
Well, the logic is the same. So if your counter argument would apply, then it would also apply to this example that I've given.
So the problem of evil essentially is challenging and saying it's inconsistent for God to be all good and all powerful. The goodness of God and the omnipotence of God is logically incompatible with evil in the world.
Yes, but it's not saying based off of the Christian definition of good. That's not.
But the title of today's debate, and that's why I asked you the Christian God. I told you it's specifically.
No. Just clarify. So we are debating whether or not the Christian God is all powerful and all good.
Yeah.
We are not saying that the Christian definition of all good is right. We're saying it's wrong. They're wrong. You are wrong when you say it is not always wrong to drown babies.
Right. Okay. Fine. So again, that's when I would push back and start saying, okay, let's consider, for example, prisons. Basically, I would contend, and because my model of morality is built on authority. How many minutes do we have now? And I closed my opening statement by saying that God uses evil to bring about good. When you look through the life of the apostles, Jesus, before he leaves the earth, he's saying that he's talking about the way that Peter is going to die in John chapter 21, which is going to bring glory to God. That the death, we have a saying, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. So you see Jesus talking about the death that Peter is going to die. And every time you look at Paul before he dies in 2 Timothy, his final letter, there's joy when they finish that. They know they're facing their martyrdom. He joyfully writes in 2 Timothy chapter 4, I have finished the race, I've passed the test, now awaits me the crown. So one of the things that we see is that God uses evil governments and wicked rulers to bring about his good. And the classic example, again, I would go back to is Jesus Christ. If you only had a godly government at that time, if you had a government that was so righteous, Jesus would not have been crucified. And if Jesus was not crucified, then as a Christian, there's no salvation for the rest of the world. So I think it's imperative to the plan of God to have wicked governments and rulers, at least in the case of Jesus, to bring about the outcome that he wanted to bring, salvation for the whole world. Now, again, I said in my opening statement, I don't know, I will not be able to get into the specifics of why did God pick Hitler. But seeing the cross, which is actually what Christianity stands and falls upon, the cross of Christ, it gives me faith to believe that God has good reasons for permitting, including Hitler, to come there. And in his time, God disposed of Hitler. Thank God for that. Yeah, so, yeah.
When you come up and ask questions, if you can come up right here so the microphone can go up. Sure. You don't have to be on camera, just kind of
Yeah.
Hey Sam, welcome to Georgia.
I'm sorry?
I said welcome to Georgia. Everyone's been cool to you.
But everyone's been absolutely lovely, and I felt I've come to church in some sense.
You mentioned authority of God and that kind of justified situation. I would be curious on your response to where that authority and justification applies to a hurricane that rips a baby from a mother's arm and 25,000 people that starved.
Right. Well, so you're talking about natural disasters and how that plays into the goodness of God.
Sure.
All right. Now, if you notice that in my opening statement, I don't distinguish between moral evil and natural evil, which is something that some people who present a theodicy, a defense against evil would do. They would distinguish, well, God, moral evil is because of human being sinfulness and all that. Notice I didn't do that. I actually flat out said that God was responsible for all of it. So the distinction to me is not important. But your question, to be more specific, is why is that God allows natural evil to take place, like disasters, hurricanes, that basically includes the killing of babies? My answer to that is because of sin. Because of sin, and when I say sin, I'm pointing back to the first sin that takes place. Now again, if you're not a believer in Christ, I don't expect you to go, well, that makes sense. I'm not expecting that, right? So I'm saying that if you believe that God created a perfect world in Genesis 1, and then man sins, God places man as his co-regent to rule the world with him under his light. I'll just finish my point and you can follow up here. So God creates man to rule this world with him. Man's failure right in Genesis 3 brings upon a curse on the earth itself, not just the man. The earth itself is under the curse. And ultimately, the story, basically I'm just talking through the storyline of the entire Bible, falls upon Jesus, God's own son. And through whom he's going to redeem the world. And when you come to the book of Revelation, it's basically a new Genesis, a world without disasters. And God is going to rule the world with a man again, except this man is Christ Jesus. It's one whole narrative with a picture of that. So your question is, how does, for example, God do that? It's an act of judgment because we're still suffering the effects of Adam's sin. That's from a biblical worldview. But I'm hoping you'll follow up and give me a chance to get deeper. Yeah.
So the sin thing that's the sticking point for me, because it seems that if I was to create some type of AI,
sure,
like that the conditions set for the AI are really ultimately dependent on.
Yes.
So if I was to have an AI with the capability to say, burn my house down, and it goes and does that.
Right.
Would it be AI's fault to do that? And should we punish every single AI that has nothing to do with that AI?
Yeah, I think that, for example, when the analogy, I think it's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, and I think that the relationship of man to God is not analogous to that of an AI to a human being. So I think that for example, man is created as a person. Now again, Tom and I both don't believe in free will, but that doesn't mean we're AIs. We're not AIs. We actually have personhood. We make choices. I don't think that God wired us to commit sin. I think God decrees sin. I think
wired us like Romans 2:15 that is written on our hearts, though, correct?
What is written on the hearts in Romans 2:15? Morality, yes.
My last question. So if that's the case, how could I tell the difference between Satan or any other thing that set that on my heart? Wouldn't I come out necessarily smelling like roses to that standard because it's in my heart? It's almost as if I have no choice. If we were to replace the God writing that in Romans 2:15 to some other authority, that seems to make the entire aspect of morality arbitrary and meaningless for my perspective, devoid of any meaning, because it's just set by the command. It's just do this.
It's not set on a command.
Change if there was anyone else setting that authority.
So it's not set on a command. Morality is based on God's nature, who He is. So for example, lying is wrong because God is truth. Hatred is wrong because God is love. Murder is wrong because God is life. God's nature is a very benchmark that distinguishes right from wrong, good from evil. So in a sense, when you talk about, for example, evil like murder, yes, it's against God's nature. But can God decree that to bring about something through which He intends to glorify Himself? And all I'm saying is yes. And if you ask me how, and you pick a specific instance, I'm not going to be able to give you the answer as to how that specific event is going to bring about that goodness. But what I'm saying to you is I look to the cross and see that He's able to take the worst evil, turn it into the greatest good. That to me is why I'm placing my faith that He's going to do that on everything else. I don't see that inconsistency between the two, and that's my response.
Well, thank you for responding, and I hope the rest of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
For TJump, I have a question. So if you say that we're using drowning babies or murder or things like that is evil, why is it evil to you? As an unbeliever, why is it evil to you?
Well, I believe morality is a real thing. I believe it's out there. It exists in the world, kind of like fitness does. Fitness is a higher order emergent property. It's a description.
But what about it? Like, why is the life of this child being snuffed out by a flood, why is that evil?
Well, it's like saying, why is bending space-time gravity? I mean, the word describes a phenomenon. There is a real phenomenon that exists in the world, which I think is morality. And this action is discontinuous with that phenomenon. So it's like saying, why do things fall towards objects with mass? Like, because that's how nature works. So there's this nature of nature.
Why do you call it bad as opposed to good?
Why do we call it? Because that's the way the consistency of nature works. It's like saying, well, why do we say God's actions are good and not bad? That's how they define the terms in the worldview. So we can say that the least fit animal is the one that survives the most, but it doesn't really matter which label you give to which side of the phenomenon. The phenomenon is there regardless. So our label, our choice of label of saying, well,
So you've labeled it bad.
All words are labels. So
Right.
if we label God as good, if God's Bible labels God as good, he could have just labeled it as bad. The phenomenon is the same. Look, black is black, regardless of whether you call it white.
So is this baby drowning at the flood bad? I really just don't understand quite your definition, this consistency of the universe. I'm not sure. But so you find that bad. But you're doing it from your perspective. So if I have it correctly, your perspective as an unbeliever, understand, is this world perspective. We exist on this world together as a group of humans. And in order to get along, we have labeled some things good, some things bad, so that we can keep going and living together in society, and we make the world work this way.
Well, not exactly. So I see.
I mean,
No. So just to clarify, when I say labels, we can call something, like if we look at a painting of a penguin, it has black and it has white.
Right.
Now we can switch the labels and say we can call the white black and we can call the black white, but the objective properties are the same.
Yes.
So our labels, our words mean nothing. They're
Okay.
irrelevant. So why do we call the white white and the black black? Those are the labels we picked.
Right.
So there is an objective feature of the world, and we labeled that as goodness. And there is an objective feature of the world, and we label that as badness. They're real things. They're objective. They exist in the world, and we gave them names.
Okay.
So I'm saying morality, moral things, and immoral things are real things. Like black and white are real things.
Right. But in your worldview, a baby dying is a bad thing.
Yes.
But my point is in his view, or the view of the Christian God, if we go to the book, with him being completely and totally sovereign, since he's the potter that made the clay, he made this baby to be drowned. It is doing its purpose. How is that immoral?
So I'm saying
And we're
that,
saying within this idea that there is a God. And I'm just assuming that since that's not the argument that we're making.
right. So if we assume there is a God, and we assume there is morality.
And we're using the Christian God using the biblical view.
Sure. Let's assume Yahweh.
He is the potter who has created
Okay.
the clay, and some for this and some for that. So can he really be termed immoral for creating something for his own use?
Yeah, so if we said there is a God, Yahweh actually exists, and let's suppose in the Bible it said the world is flat, and we've discovered scientifically, no, the world is round. So even if there was a God, and the God said the world is flat, he's wrong. He's just wrong. Like, this is a factually incorrect statement. So I'm making the same thing about morality. There is a moral fact, like saying the world is round, and it is that drowning babies is always wrong.
But is it always wrong?
Yes,
Why?
because
Who
it's,
says so?
I believe that is the fact of reality.
No. I mean, a fact is
It
something
feels a little bit like we're
demonstrable.
going in circles just a bit.
I'm sorry.
If you've got follow-up questions, so we'll give some other people to.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks both of you for coming. And particularly, I know you probably feel like you walked into the lion's den. So,
Not at all.
yeah, we're all. We talked a lot about baby killing, unfortunately, but I'm going to talk about it too.
Let's do
We
it.
talked about God killing babies, but what we haven't talked about is where God orders the Hebrews to kill babies.
Absolutely.
Is it morally correct now for the present nation of Israel to kill Palestinian babies because they perceive Palestine as a threat. Is that morally correct?
No,
Why not?
because God didn't command it.
How do we know?
I mean, so if you're asking the question of how we know, I'm going to get into basically what I hold to, which is basically called cessationism, the view that God is no longer speaking. He has spoken completely through Scripture. So I don't believe God is speaking today. That's a theological position I hold to. So I don't believe in any modern day prophets and all that. You may hear some Christians claiming to be that. There is only one type of apostles and prophets today, and those are false prophets and false apostles, as far as I'm concerned. Sorry.
What if he did?
No, I mean,
Hypothetically, if God did command it, would it be good?
okay, that's a different question.
Divine
Yeah,
command theory. So-
yeah, divine command theory. Yeah, so if God did command it, it would be good. Yes.
Okay, so how do I know that he did command this?
So the issue is, again, so the question of how we know is an epistemological issue. And if you're asking that of biblical times, it came through the prophets. And there were severe repercussions to which that happened. For example, if a prophet were to prophesy something, he had to establish his authority by making predictive prophecies. And if it didn't come true, he gets stoned to death. I need to sidetrack a little bit because I found it amazing that all these so-called modern day prophets predicted that Trump would win the election. It was a 50-50 shot, and he still got it wrong. So we're talking about, in a biblical setting of the Old Testament, all those guys would have to be stoned dead. So what I'm saying is that if you have a situation where a prophet claims to speak from God, you know his predictions are coming true, and this is what the prophet says, and then basically the judgment is carried out against the people. Now I'll just finish the point by saying that's not wrong because God commands it. It's an act of judgment. But if there's a difference, we have to distinguish between had God commanded it, which in the case it's right, because God has the power to basically execute divine justice. And did God command it? And how can we know? So the how can we know question, I'm saying God is no longer, I don't believe God is actively speaking today because he has given us scripture. This is a theological position called cessationism. And I'm a cessationist, so in that sense, but that's the difference between the epistemological issue and the divine command theory.
Where did he countermand that?
Where did he
countermand that command?
counter?
When did he say it was not okay for the Israelites to kill babies?
Where did he say he was not okay?
Yeah, when did he say that they shouldn't do it anymore?
I mean, so when you look to the
He
biblical,
wanted them to do it.
let's
He didn't do it through a prophet. He did it personally. He said, kill babies.
no, he did. I'll give you the example. 1 Samuel 15.
Exactly.
1 Samuel 15 is a passage where God commands the prophet, and he did command it to a prophet because the name of the prophet is Samuel.
Right.
So, sorry. It was a little bit funnier in my head than how it came out. But anyway.
Because your name is Samuel, yes.
You didn't have to explain that. That was just the impact. But I'm just saying, but the point is, it came to a prophet, and that basically he commanded it. And the fact that Saul didn't do it meant that Saul got kicked out of, and David basically replaces him. So that's how serious the role of the king to execute justice was. So that's my answer. Again, feel free to follow up, but that's my answer as to the prophet did command it.
But when did he countermand the command to kill babies?
There is no need to countermand that because, or to counter command that. Well, I'll just finish that. I'll just finish that by saying, there's no need for God to counter command because the command was to do it one time. You see, the biblical command to exterminate these people was a one-time action. We can go through 1 Samuel 15 if you want to. We can go through the annihilation of the Canaanites if you want to. It's all there. We can go through that if you want to, but it was not a command to do it continuously. It was a one-time command. So if there's no need to repeat that.
If Samuel was declared insane, or we know that he was insane,
Yes.
how do we know that he spoke for God?
So again, the issue of how do we know he spoke from God, or versus how would we know today?
How do we know?
Today or then?
Well, how do we know today? How did they even know?
So again, Samuel was basically already recognized as a prophet in Israel. His predicted prophecies that always came true, including, for example, the house of Eli being removed. That prophecy came true. So he has already established himself as the agent through whom God speaks in the past. So in fact, that's already been established. So the command came. I think we need to distinguish here, how do we know versus did God command? And all I'm saying is, if God did command, it is right because God commanded it. But if the question of how we know is an epistemological issue, and I'm saying today God is not speaking that way anymore. So
So how do we know now what God
Well, I mean, does anybody else have any questions? You can come back later if possible.
Yeah.
No, but again, as I said, we will follow up later. So.
Again, thanks everyone for coming. And I'm sorry, I don't have a question for you.
Meanie.
If Christians know what comes next as far as an afterlife, then where were we before? Here. And I like coming back to the idea of if we have a soul and the soul goes to heaven, then there must be a soul factory somewhere.
This was a part of a theological dispute as to was the soul basically coming into being at the point of conception, or when does a person become a soul at the moment that they are given birth to? Now, I've not studied that deeply, and again, I highly recommend my good friend whom you know, Eric Hernandez, who has done a lot of work on the area of the soul, to look at him. Or the main guy who is the expert on the subject is J.P. Molan, whose entire work has been on the nature of the soul. But so I don't know where the soul comes from and all that. It's not an area that I've looked through. But in terms of did we have a pre-existence, I can say no. Because again, the Bible doesn't teach that pre-existence. But the soul does continue on after that into the next life. That's something that is basically taught in the scripture. Although I should add, there's a big debate now as to whether, or not now, there's been a big debate historically as to whether this immortality of the soul is conditional or unconditional. Meaning, would those who go to hell be basically extinguished, annihilated, gone, or will they be continuously eternal conscious torment, which is unconditional immortality? Personally, I'm still open on the issue, and my personal stance right now is I believe in unconditional immortality. But I'm actually in the midst, I've actually contacted two people and asked them whether they'd be willing to do a debate on my channel on this topic. One of them is Chris Date. The other one is Jeff Robinson from the Gospel Coalition. So that's a topic that I want to know as well. So I've actually invited people to come and do a debate on that.
So just to expand on that, someone just barely falls below the threshold to make it upstairs. Mm-hmm. They roast in hell forever.
So as far as I'm concerned, as far as my theology goes, I don't think someone barely makes it or doesn't. No one makes it except those whom basically Jesus died for. So basically, either Jesus takes our hell for us, or we take our hell ourselves. Either Jesus has paid our infinite punishment for us, or we carry on our own shoulders that infinite punishment. So, and the way in which that punishment is laid on Christ is on the basis of faith alone. If a person has faith in Christ, God basically transfers the sins of that person onto Christ in a process we call justification. He imputes the righteousness of Christ and puts it upon that person. Christ dies for the wickedness of that person is rewarded for the righteousness of Christ. Now, if that has not happened, the person basically is bearing their own sin. So it's not a case of barely making it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi. My question's for both. I was just wondering what aspects, if any, positive child murder, and then did the children that were murdered by God in the Bible deserve?
What was the question?
What are the positive aspects, if any, to drowning babies or killed babies, and did the children that God killed in the Bible deserve it?
Right. So
You
I would say no, there are no positive aspects to drowning babies, and no, they did not deserve it.
Did you even have to ask him the question? Or were you just being nice to him because he was being quiet for a long time? So anyway, just kidding. It's a great question. And yes, I think that, for example, that when you look through let me just share, for example, I brought up 1 Samuel 15. 1 Samuel 15, God commands Saul to annihilate the Amalekites. He says, kill men, women, children, infant, and even their animals. It's a brutal command. It's ethnic cleansing. He commands them to basically annihilate them. Now, Saul doesn't kill every one of them. He spares in the text, 1 Samuel 15, a guy by the name of Agag. And so this name is going to be important. So what happens is that because of that, Samuel comes to him and says that you have failed God. He gets dethroned. God is going to appoint David to take his place. What happens is basically no one knows why did God come up with such a. There's no stated. It's hard to conceive why God would come up with something so brutal. I get it if you want to kill the men, but why the children? Seems to make no sense at all. Until you come to about some 700 years later, Israel is now captive in Babylon. And then the Persian Empire now takes over the Babylonian Empire under Cyrus. And in this empire, we find in the book of Esther, there comes a man by the name of Haman, and he wants to annihilate every Jew from all across the empire. And you find out he's actually a descendant of King Agag. He's called Haman the Agagite, a descendant of King Agag. Had Haman been allowed to have his way, every Jew in the world would have been destroyed. Now, you and I are thinking, why is that a bad thing? Just one group for another group. Well, again, as a Christian, the focus of the Jewish people was to basically have the Messiah, the Messianic remnant. If the Jewish people didn't survive, Jesus does not come. If Jesus does not come, Jesus does not die. If Jesus does not die, no salvation for the whole world. So when you look back to the question of why God commanded the killing of the at least in the case of 1 Samuel 15, you ask yourself the question, did God kill the children because he wanted those children to die, or was God killing those children because he wanted to die for the whole world? And I'll let you keep with that question.
I don't think anything addressed it. Is there any positive aspect?
I think that was the positive aspect. God killed those children so that he could die for the sins of the world.
So you're saying he killed them to save the Israelites or something like that?
Yes.
And then did those children deserve it?
Again, every human being, if you have the view, and yes, short answer, yes. If you take the view that every human being is sinful, yes, then it follows that every human being deserves death. So.
Any other questions?
Could you guys fill in each other's argument?
Sure. We've done that actually. You can go to the YouTube channel and find it. We've actually had a mock debate where he played the Christian and I played the atheist, and he lost that one because at the end of the debate he actually said he would pray to me for me to become a Christian. He still hasn't. You want to do that?
Yeah, sure. So Samuel's argument is that there are instances where it is morally justified to drown babies, such as in the case if you have the authority to do so, which God does. Therefore, by argument, that it is always, 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 always wrong to drown babies is factually incorrect because there are instances such as those given by God's authority.
It's pretty good. Yeah, so on my part, I would say that drowning babies is always wrong. There's no instance that you can justify. I'm trying to come up with a serious face. You're not helping, Tom. So the drowning babies is always wrong. There's no instance that you can justify that. Since God drowns babies, by definition, God cannot be all good. And if God cannot be all good, then basically it shows that basically an all good and all powerful God does not exist. Your argument has just been destroyed.
Yep.
All that one? Oh, yeah. You got it.
Tom came in blazing.
So we're here with Ozzy, the CEO of Meeting Himself and the Atheist Roundtable. So how do you think the debate went today?
I think it went awesome. I mean, this room is not it's not the best for audio by any stretch of the imagination, but I felt like Tom came in blazing.
Hey, talk us through those fucking badass shoes there, bro.
Yeah, so I got to rotate. These are some of the remade retros.
Now, as far as atheist footwear goes, these are some pretty badass. These are lacking belief in all kinds of deities right here.
Yeah, this is where I disprove God and I can walk on water.
Well, we're here with Oz again. I'm Pastamike. Oz, we love you, bro.
Love you.
So I'm here with the Tom Jumpster. This is you go by Thomas Jump on your, no you don't, you're TJump. TJump, the Theist Slayer.
My name's John.
John Jump.
Now I'm missing a part of me. I feel empty. I don't know what it is. There's this strange thing that is not with me today that should be. I feel I'm lost.
I think you know what? This is not a lazy boy. What the
What?
hell? No. What is this? It's like some little deck chair or something.
Yeah, my immortality is being challenged.
You debated a pretty strong guy today.
I know he's ripped. He can bench like 300.
Yeah. Weak arguments, but he looks. No. So how do you feel?
Showing your bias there a little bit, possibly. Come on.
No, I'm nonpartisan here. So how do you feel the debate went?
Good live debate. Good fun. Should do a lot more of them. You need to work with the guys here. Do a whole bunch of them. Get us down here a lot.
So what have you got to say about modern day debates?
Yeah, I apologize to James about our day debates. We were supposed to stream it on his channel, and we missed the opportunity. I apologize to James.
Well, now, if you and James got into a wrestling match,
oh, James would win. James was a national champion football player in high school and college. James is like as strong as like 10 of us combined. Strong. He's ripped. He used to be a brick.
Oh,
he's stronger than you. He could lift you up with one hand.
Well, I don't claim to be strong. It's hard to be strong and amazingly talented at singing. So, is that James?
That's James. Hi, James. We're talking about you right now. Hey, James. How's it going? We're talking about you on stream right now. We're talking about you on the TART stream right now. We're apologizing because we.
Let's get your debate champion, the winner. Let's get the winner in here. Let's get the winner in. Awesome. You know, that was James that just called.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So he just called. We're just letting him know that sometimes atheists lose at debates. Do you mind taking a quick seat here? Awesome. Now, for some of the atheist YouTuber viewers that may see this, and hopefully we get some theist viewers,
Right.
just if you don't mind, say your name and a little bit of your background so I can put some B-roll together.
Sure, I'm Samuel Nesan. I'm from Malaysia. I'm the co-founder of Explain Apologetics, which is a ministry dedicated to the defense of the Christian faith. And it's based in Malaysia, of course, but we are hoping to expand at the moment. I'm currently based in Texas, furthering my theological studies, hoping to finish my PhD. That's a long-term plan.
Now, you've debated Tom many times.
Yes.
So you and Tom have a pretty good relationship as far as like these debates go?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have a great relationship. We've had all kinds of debates. We've had 2-on-2 debates where he teamed up with Matt Delahanty. I teamed up with Dr. Randall Rouser. We've had mock debate where I played the atheist and he's played the Christian. We've had a triple threat debate where it was Tom, myself, and a Muslim, Nadir Ahmad. We've had all sorts of debates, and Tom is someone I really enjoyed. We're not doing debates to show we're smarter than anyone. In fact, sometimes we're not. But the fact of the matter is that we do debates because Christ has given us a command to communicate the gospel, and we do so to honor Him. And I think the best way you can honor Him is to present ourselves with gentleness and respect.
This is a really philosophical question I ask a lot of people. What's your favorite ice cream?
I knew this was coming. My favorite ice cream, chocolate chip for now.
That's awesome.
Bronx.
You know what? You're winning me over here. I like that. Well, really appreciate it, man. Thank you. Awesome
Thanks
debate.
so much.
So I found Murder Shed Steve lurking around, actually, up in the. Is it an attic or a loft? What is that thing up there?
It's a sneaky hole.
It is a sneaky hole.
The attic. It's where I watch Jeff sleep.
Well, you know what? How do you feel that this debate went?
I think it went pretty well. I think that Samuel handled himself pretty well, but obviously TJump is a beast when it comes to morality.
And real quick, spitfire round. Atheist hot tub. Who you taking out of the two debaters?
I kind of want to see Sam in a swimsuit.
You want to take Sam into the atheist hot tub?
I think I do.
Can you lick the microphone for me? Awesome. Murder Shed Steve, everybody. Thanks a lot, bro.
Tom came in blazing.